Hello, friends. Today I want to talk to you about a book which I started creating in 2017. First published it then, and the title was In Memory of Lieutenant Ian Lester MacDonald of the Black Watch, 1923 to 1945, Remembered with Love and Pride by Alexander MacDonald. So Ian MacDonald was my uncle. He died at the end of the Second World War. And Alexander MacDonald was his father, who wrote an account of his early life until his death. Um, Now, recently, I've been on a trip to Scotland and managed to discover quite a lot more about the Operation Veritable, which he was engaged in. And so the book itself has more or less doubled in length. And I've also changed the title. So it's now Remembered with Love and Pride, Lieutenant Ian Lester MacDonald of the Black Watch, 1923-1945, Alexander MacDonald, edited by me. Published through Amazon and through lulu.com. Now, they're slightly different uh, published books, which I can talk about later. But for the time being, what I would like to do, I've already read the early version of the book, the one of the first with the first title, In Memory of Lieutenant Ian MacDonald. And so what I'd like to do is to show you how the book has, or the additions to the book, and how it's changed, not just the title. So first of all, I decided that Remembered with Love and Pride would be a better title because it's more general. And then the subtitle is now my uncle's name. Anyway, so let me show you the current, I'll share with you the current PDF. Oh, and by the way, this PDF is available as a free to download from the website of the university where I used to work. So I can also put the details of that in the description and the comments. I'll probably do that later. All right, so there we are. That's the first page. So there's basically the subtitle and title have switched round. If we just go through this, yeah, there's a little explanation of how it was first published in 2017 under another title. And so it goes. There's the Lulu. It's still available from Lulu as a hardcover and a paperback and an EPUB, and also from Amazon as a paperback, a hardcover, and a Kindle book. So trying to cover all the bases there. Now, this is all the same as before. That's my uncle there. Because this is a PDF, the color appears as it is. In the Amazon books, they are actually black and white. They are cheaper. The Lulu books are color, interior, and more expensive. So that's basically the difference between the two sets of books. So this part is new. Loretto 3rd 15, 1940-41. Why have I put that in here? Well, as it so happens, Loretto is a school outside Edinburgh. It's a boarding school, private school. My uncle is here in this picture. Can you see my cursor? And my father is actually here. Hope you can see my cursor. So my uncle is in the middle row on the right, far right, and my father is in the front row on the far left. There's I think about 2 years in between them in age. My uncle being the older. So that's new. And I've added some comments about my father there, which I won't read now. This is as before. This is all as before. I've added a footnote explaining Lest We Forget, which was from a poem by Rudyard Kipling, Kipling actually appears 3 times in this book, funnily enough. He's mentioned 3 times. This is the same as before. That's my grandfather, Alexander MacDonald, CBE. And the next one is as before. That's my grandmother. I've added a bit of detail about her background. And also that she died in Cheltenham. I think that was probably not in the original book. This is the same as before. This is the same as before, and all this about fishing, taking my grandfather taking my uncle fishing in Chile. This is, well, it's from 2024, so and this is another. This is the golf course. One of the golf courses my grandfather helped to design in Chile. This is my Uncle Ian as a boy. And this is, as before, where he was born in Edinburgh. And this is from the manuscript, or the handwritten memorial, as I typed this out. And that was the original book that I produced in 2017. This is where my uncle is buried, in Rheinberg in Germany. Lots of soldiers, well, mainly airmen there, actually. That's my uncle's grave. And this was the 80th anniversary of his death. I hired a German piper, Niels Boshammer, and he played some piping melodies. And this is the simplified family tree, which sort of speaks for itself. That's recent. I have recently added. And what else have we got? Yeah, so all of this part is more or less unchanged from the beginning. What is new is Appendix II, the Black Watch at Goch, and Appendix III, the Black Watch Archives. Those two appendices. Yeah, which are quite long, at least the first of those is. And then these Black Watch title changes, that's talking about the way the regiment changed its name and so on over time in the history. And then there's a select bibliography, which is new, and an index, which is new. So there's quite a lot which is new. I've also rewritten parts of the foreword. But I've already read this to you in a previous video, so I'll just link to the video. Yeah, I don't think there's much changed here. Just carry on a bit. Okay. Yeah, and I record my thanks to the Black Watch Museum in Perth for their assistance. So it was earlier this year that I contacted them, 2026. So that's all fairly new. And then something about myself, which is new. Okay, you can stop it and read it, pause it and read it if you like. Now these links only work as hyperlinks in the PDF. So, they are listed in the printed book, but of course you can't click on them in the printed book. But yeah, I think they're fairly self-explanatory. So what I think I will do is go to, if I can somehow, whoops, I've got that, something's in the way here. Just a minute. Move it out of the way. Go down to the bottom. There we are. I'm going to search for Appendix II in the PDF. And so that takes me straight to it. And this is the bit which or the largest part of the bit which I've added to the book. I've also added a couple of footnotes here and there. but I'm going to read this to you now to explain the action which my uncle was involved in. So it's Appendix II, the Black Watch at Goch. So first of all, there's this map from John MacGregor's The Spirit of Angus. And you can see that Goch is quite close to the Dutch border. You've got Arnhem, you've got the River Rhine, you've got the Reichswald forest, Kleve. This is Genep. You can't quite see the P there. It's on the borderline. Kalka, Rees, Wesel, Santen, and Kevelaer are all in Germany. Okay, so Goch is in Germany as well. And then the Ruhr area down on the bottom right. So this is basically the area we're talking about, which was the area of Operation Veritable, which started, let me remember, February the 8th, 1945, and I think finished on March 10th. Very important operation, which is often, or has been up to now, neglected quite a lot in favor of Operation Market Garden and, of course, D-Day itself. Now, this is a more detailed map of Goch, showing the Black Watch 5th Battalion, A Company, that's COY is company, okay? A Company, B Company, C Company, D Company, and also the River Neus, okay? I think this bridge features in the story, which I'm about to read to you. Can't quite read what that says there. What does that say? No, it's a little hard to read. But anyway, this phase 1 is the city in the town of Goch. Phase 2, you can see below there, sort of directly south of Goch, with A, B, C, and D companies all involved. Then phase 3, over to the southwest, a place called, well, there's a farm called Thomashof and another farm called Robbenhof. And you've got the 4 companies again of the 5th Battalion. Okay, so that's quite a useful map. Again, from John MacGregor's The Spirit of Angus, which I list in the bibliography. All right, so, and next, Goch, February 1945, the Battle of the Rhineland. And this is the front cover of Roderick Grant's book, The 51st Highland Division at War. And this extract, which I'm about to read, is from that book, pages 119 to 125. I discovered it by chance at Inverhaven Church earlier this year. And a little bit about Roderick Grant. He was a journalist, and he wrote novels, including A Private Vendetta and a book about his Scottish childhood memoirs, which title I rather like, Clap Hands for the Singing Molecatcher, 2007. Okay, on we go. So, who are these two gentlemen? On the left is Captain Alex Brodie, MC, Military Cross. And on the right is Company Sergeant Major T. Fell, or possibly Full. Taken in Holland in January 1945. Brodie is on the left. And this is from the Black Watch archives, with that reference there, BW 240-11-3. Okay, so Brodie is the man who provided the account I'm about to read. He became a temporary major in February 1945, which is when he actually, I think, took over D Company. There we are. Account of Major Alex Brodie, Military Cross Commander of D Company. Let's take a quick look at the footnotes before we go on. In this account, Brodie is given the rank of major, but this seems to have been a temporary battlefield promotion from captain in view of his commanding D Company, not confirmed officially until 1st of July 1946. That's correct. I write seems to, but in fact it was a temporary battlefield promotion. And Brodie was awarded the DSO, the Distinguished Service Order, for his gallantry and leadership at Goch in February 1945. He was wounded and replaced by Major Johnstone. In 1956, he was awarded an OBE military division while military attaché at Seoul, South Korea, not far from where I am in Japan. Judging from this account, it must have been he who mentioned Ian MacDonald in dispatches. That's my uncle. His own recommendation for the DSO, 2 pages see below, is in the National Archives UK, and there's the reference, WO 373 53738. His steel helmet with the red hackle on it is at the Black Watch Museum, Perth, and the museum keeps a collection of his papers at PW 231. Yeah, the red hackle is one of the symbols of the Black Watch. It's a physical symbol put on the headgear. So in the case of a steel helmet, it was painted on. All right. So here we go. This will take a little while to read. The object was to capture the smaller part of Goch on the south side of the River Neas. Before this, the 5th Seaforth, Caithness and Sutherland Battalion, including Hector Mackenzie and his A Company, were to capture an anti-tank ditch, and it was hoped a bridge over a small stream and a German pillbox beyond it. We, D Company, that is, were to capture the first houses in Goch, and the rest of the 5th Battalion and then the 5-7 Gordons were to pass through into the town. The 15th and 52nd Divisions were to capture the rest of Goch on the other side of the river. At one stage, a secret weapon was to be fired at Goch, and we were advised not to be forward of a certain place at the time. It was a flying mattress, and it made quite a noise, but what harm it did I never saw. Flying mattress, I've put a footnote there. It would be good to have a photograph, but those are quite hard to come by, so I haven't put one in, not at this time anyway. But basically, it was a rocket launcher with many rockets, which looked a bit like a mattress, I suppose. Having received my orders, I went back to D Company to brief them and give my own orders. In fact, owing to lack of time, the two merged into one. The men had been well fed. Hector Mackenzie and his Seaforths had gone off to carry out their attack, and so D Company had been able to relax in the farm buildings and were now far more awake and alert than me. This often happens in war. The officers spend most of the day buzzing about on reconnaissances or collecting pay or dealing with 100 little jobs, while the men hang about, resting, eating regular meals and writing letters which the officers have to censor when they get back to their company. The men, of course, see it differently. While the officers are having an interesting time driving all over the countryside, they have nothing to do but endless fatigues. Cleaning weapons or billets gets monotonous, they say. I did my briefing, eating my stew and pointing to the map, while the platoon commanders and Ken Buchanan pointed to theirs so everyone could see. One of the platoon commanders would have been my uncle. They were all far too alert and asking bright questions. Is it the 15th or 52nd Division who are moving north at 00:33 hours, sir? As if it mattered, I thought. However, the next question was a good one and rather showed me up. Sir, this bridge over the River Neas, next to the left of our objective, oughtn't we to secure it? I think we have enough to do already. But Ian MacDonald, that was my uncle's question, and he's described only as a platoon commander in Rooney's Slog or Swan, page 158, but the bridge is identified in a map, in fact. Ian MacDonald, fresh from home and perfectly right, was not to be put off. He persisted that something had to be done about the blasted thing, but it was getting late and the command post was 2 or 3 miles away. A matter of this sort could hardly be discussed over the wireless or even the telephone if there was one. So I had to say that it was too late to think about it now. I suppose everyone from Bill Bradford, that's the battalion commander, downwards, had been too tired to notice this bridge on the map in the poor light, and so nothing was arranged. At the appointed time, off we went. We found Hector Mackenzie had captured the anti-tank ditch, but had not pushed on to the bridge and pillbox. I thought you chaps were going to take them, he said helpfully. In fact, the bridge was not held. Indeed, we were walking over it before I realized we had come to it. A runner arrived soon after to say that his platoon commander, a much decorated sergeant from Bromley, Kent, could not find any pillboxes, and was there one anyway? Then from nowhere, a German Air Force corporal appeared at my side, saying we had not captured his pillbox and what was to become of his comrades inside it. So I told him to guide a section there and tell his pals to come out with their hands up, and they would be all right. This is what happened. The rest of the battalion then came past, and I thought we could doze for a bit, but not so. Along comes a message that we were to go on and capture the monastery hospital, which I luckily remembered to be a big building on our side of the main square. Goch was a market town, which I suppose was as big as Blairgowrie in my home county of Perthshire. I went forward with Private McInnes to see what I could do in the darkness. I reached Graham Pilcher's company, that's Major Graham Pilcher, which was the forward company, and with his help made a plan which involved sending Bill Chisholm's platoon along some back streets to my right, and Sergeant Delves and his platoon still further round, while MacDonald, that's Ian MacDonald, stayed by Graham Pilcher in reserve. This is not perhaps exactly what I said, but it is more or less what I remember happened. Just before all this, Ian MacDonald reported that he had not only found the wretched bridge, but he had crossed it, and was in touch with troops on the other side who were not interested in it any more than I had been. Luckily, Bill Bradford spoke over the wireless then, and I told him and asked if the Bren gun carrier platoon, who were kept in reserve in this battle, could take over so MacDonald could rejoin D Company for the next phase. This was agreed and carried out very quickly. I sent McInnes back for the company, and Graham and I explored the cellar of the house he was in. We found a rather sticky liquor, not unlike Van der Hum, and some bottled gooseberries. They were unsweetened and rather nasty. Then I sat down and went to sleep. Someone woke me up, amused and rather shocked that anybody should go to sleep during a battle, and I explained my little plan. The two platoons went off, and after a decent interval, McInnes and I set off after them. We found Bill Chisholm and his platoon falling about in a huge bomb crater which took up the whole of a little alley they were trying to get along. But Bill was well in charge, and they were pulling each other out and trying to improvise a bridge with planks from the floor of a bombed house. There's a note about Van der Hum, spicy South African liqueur. McInnes and I found a way round by another street and emerged onto the main road which led from Graham Pilcher's company to the monastery hospital. It was a good wide road, and that is why I had told Bill Chisholm and Sergeant Delves to avoid it and go round the back streets. There was a barricade across the street beyond the gateway into the monastery hospital, and by the gate the German equivalent of a jeep was parked. There were some men by the barricade, and for some reason which now escapes me, I thought they were British. Okay, this is a long footnote giving the account in the which as it appears in The Spirit of Angus, John McGregor's book, 1988. Again, mentioning my uncle by name. Reserve platoon led by Lieutenant Ian MacDonald. Okay, let's move on with the main account. I strolled over to the wee motor car with my hands in my pockets, followed by McInnes with the Italian Birette submachine gun he affected, which I don't think he understood, for it never worked, slung over his shoulder. I had my hands in my pockets because I found it stopped the men getting excited and so tiring themselves. If I drew my pistol, they got het up. I said, "What have we got hold of here?" And there was a dreadful hush. McInnes and I appreciated the situation and decided simultaneously on the course we would follow. We turned and ran. He had a slight start, but I soon passed him and could hear the clatter of his little feet dying away behind me on the cobblestones. There were shocked cries of "Hands up, Tommy!" from behind the barricade, and a fusillade of shots, which I noticed striking sparks from the upper parts of the houses on my left. Now, it is not very good for an officer's reputation to arrive at full speed from the direction of the enemy, followed at a respectable interval by a soldier. So, as I approached Graham Pilcher's company, I started to laugh, for the situation had its comic side, and shouted, "Here comes Major Brodie, beating all records," or something equally ridiculous, and so no one shot at me. Ian MacDonald's platoon were at hand, and we worked our way back up the side of the street. When we got near the barricade, I took the platoon 2-inch mortar into the middle of the street with 1 or 2 bombs to brass it up. The mortar man had come to me before the attack to say he had broken his glasses and was not much use without them, and could he be excused. The company was much under strength, and so I had to tell him that he would have to come along carrying his mortar and someone else could shoot it off if it should be necessary. Having loaded the thing, I could not remember which way you turned the wheel which set that particular pattern off, so I had to ask. At this time, the Germans were shooting, but pretty high, as people usually do in the dark, so I was safe enough. He told me, and I let off one or two bombs at the barricade, and the firing stopped. So I drew my pistol and ran off towards the monastery hospital. I ran through the gateway and turned right. There was a long high wall on my right with buttresses sticking out. A German was shooting at me from behind one of these, and another from my left on the other side of the yard on a raised tennis court. I fired back at the German with my pistol in my left hand, and he or the one across the courtyard threw a grenade. A splinter from this hit my left shoulder blade, but it only stung a bit. I ran to the next buttress and fired another couple of rounds through my revolver. Then I decided to replace the fired rounds before rushing the German in front of me. Needless to say, the ejector jammed, and it was lucky the German did not rush me with his bayonet. I managed to reload, and by this time both Germans had gone away. Lance Corporal Rhodes from Bill Chisholm's platoon then came up behind me with his section. He had been the first section over the bomb crater, and without waiting for the rest of his platoon, he had hurried to the sound of the firing. MacDonald's platoon was spread out in the courtyard, and various other sections had arrived from nowhere. Street fighting, like jungle fighting, presents control problems, and these are made greater at night. It is really a science or skill of its own, and should be carefully practiced beforehand. I remembered some lectures and sand table exercises I had attended in 1943 at the Senior Officers' School at, believe it or not, Pune, now Pune, east of Mumbai in India. And these were based on writings of heroes of the Spanish Civil War. Some of us who had been with the Liverpool Scottish in Bainbridge, County Down, had practiced house-to-house fighting at some barracks which had been bombed. But once a battalion gets into an operation, there is no time or opportunity to practice rather specialist forms of battle, and all one can do is to bash on. It was now getting light, and I led a party in a rush up the steps of the monastery hospital. One poor chap was shot down, but the rest of us arrived safely at the top of the stairway. We went into the porchway, and there was a glass door on the left. I threw a smoke grenade at it, and it bounced back and burst a foot or two from me, so I was quite badly burned on each hand and in the face. Luckily, it was not a 36 grenade, Mills bomb, but that might have broken the glass of the door. I was in some pain and rather shaken, and had to take a pull on myself. As I did this, someone opened the door from inside, and out came a young German officer with his hands up. The much-decorated sergeant from Bromley was beside me. Trust him to get into the middle of anything exciting, and said, "Can we have him, sir?" I asked what he meant, and he pointed out that some of the youngest soldiers had not killed any Germans yet. I was rather shocked and said they could not. We were still grouped on the steps, and the German officer handed me his small pistol. It was not a Luger. I sent him off with an escort and instructions that he was to be treated decently. Then quite a number of German soldiers came out of the building and from hidey holes around the courtyard with their hands up. If we had ill-treated the officer, they would have surely fought desperately and done us some harm. I asked if any of them had been wounded by a pistol, but they all said no, which was a disappointment. That was his pistol, had not wounded anybody. I told Ian MacDonald to consolidate the building against any counter-attack while I went back to Company HQ, which was probably still with Graham Pilcher up the road. "Yes, sir," says Ian. How does one consolidate a place like that?" It was not an unreasonable question, for it was a huge building with several stories, and Ian's platoon was only about 20 strong, if that. Indeed, not the least of my reasons for going back to Company HQ was to evade this slightly awesome problem. But memories of Pune flooded back, and I gave him a rather good lecture on the subject. "Put one or two men with grenades and bayonets at the top of any stairs leading down to the cellars, and don't go into them. I'll see about a flamethrower later." We had noticed skylights at the bottom of the wall, and anyway, continental houses always have cellars. Explore the ground floor, throwing a grenade of some sort into each room or spray it with a Sten gun. Then dash to the far end and turn about. Don't fix bayonets, because it will make the rifles too long and clumsy. If there was a hole in the ceiling, look out for bombs being dropped down. Occupy rooms facing forward and to the flanks, but don't stare straight out to the window. Hide behind the wall at the side and look out diagonally. 2 men, one on each side of the window if possible. Oh, and watch the stairs in case they rush down or roll grenades down them. I see, sir, he said. And what about upstairs? You won't have enough men for that, nor for the cellars, so all you can do is to cover the various stairways. I left him to it with complete confidence. He was that sort of man. I found that Kenneth Buchanan had brought Company HQ up the street, and we went into a house. Private Dow's wireless, an 18 set, was working. So the 18 set was a high-frequency portable man-pack radio transceiver used by the British Army during World War II, as the note says. I reported to Bill Bradford, whose custom it was to follow the leading company close enough to be in touch, but not so close as to cramp the company commander's style. He had a wireless set and operator with him, and usually the provost sergeant and a signals platoon motorcyclist, and often the supporting battery commander. The artillery, though, had enormous and heavy wireless sets, and this limited their ability to keep close to a thrusting commanding officer like Bill Bradford, but they did their best. I reported that we were rather scattered, and that the companies behind us must not trust us, as the Germans could easily burst through us. I told him that Ian MacDonald was doing his best to consolidate the monastery hospital and would need a flamethrower to clear the cellar, and I was out of touch with Sergeant Delves, but Bill Chisholm and his platoon were available, and I proposed to take it up the street and try to hustle the Germans away. Bill said he would push A Company Major Taylor through, and I was to get firm. I thanked him and said it was an excellent idea, but I was ready to push on if he would accept that the Germans might break past me. I then rejoined Bill Chisholm in the street outside the monastery hospital. They were standing against the houses on one side of the street, except for one man who was on my side. A German machine gun was firing down the street. It was to the credit of Bill that his men were still on the street and had not vanished into the houses where I would never have found them. I timed the burst of machine gun fire, or rather the intervals between them. These were about 5 seconds, so there was time to stroll casually across the street without haste. This I did, and the man on my side of the street followed and walked into the next burst. I was thoroughly ashamed of myself. I should have told him what to do or not to do. He is the one man for whose death I reproach myself. The machine gun must have gone away then, for a runner arrived from Ian MacDonald to say that the Germans in the cellar at the hospital had sent up a white flag, and would I come? I hurried along, still rather shaken, followed by Bill Chisholm and his platoon. I went into the cellar, which was divided into several small rooms. I was met by an elderly German captain who told me that the colonel commanding the Goch garrison was wounded badly and wanted to surrender, and would I follow him? I forget if all this was in German or English, but the rest was in German. So Brodie obviously spoke German. I found the colonel lying on a stretcher on a bed with a few soldiers standing around. I saluted and they all clicked their heels. I said that he would be well treated and could his men please carry him away. I passed the word that the men of D Company were to salute him as he was carried past, and they did. The next thing we knew was that lots of German soldiers emerged into the street from the various houses with their hands up. I suppose they saw we were civilized and would do them no harm. That's intelligent soldiering, isn't it? I brought Company HQ and Bill Chisholm's platoon into the monastery hospital, and then a crowd of enormous tanks came rolling up the street, and in the middle, CQMS Company Quartermaster Sergeant, I suppose, McGregor, in the jeep with a trailer, and our breakfasts all hot in their hay boxes. A runner from Sergeant Delves arrived, and I set off with him and one or two of the company HQ, carrying the breakfasts for Delves's platoon. I found them in a farmyard. On the continent, villages or small towns and the farmers go out to their fields to work. In Great Britain, farm buildings are usually in the middle of the fields. Probably on the continent it was safer for farms to huddle together for fear of robbers. The men of the platoon were perched up, looking over the wall and out of lofts and shouting to Sergeant Delves about enemy snipers trying to move about in various parts of the town. But he was too busy to bother about the enemy. Shoot at them, he would say. He was rather older than most of the company, with a balding head and scraggy reddish moustache. He looked like a harassed father with a lot of tiresome children, and he was busy filling in a return of ammunition expended by his platoon during the night. A little later, Brigadier Harry Cumming Bruce came from 15 Division over the river to see me. He was a Seaforth and had been aide-de-camp to Sir Harold MacMichael, the High Commissioner in Palestine in 1938-9, and frequently came to see us at Talavera Barracks. He had heard I was there and had popped over to see me, but D Company were very impressed, thinking their fame had spread abroad if a brigadier in another division would come across to see them while a battle was still going on. Indeed it was, and the Germans fired some heavy shells into Goch at the time. One completely destroyed a small house where I was standing, and another made a big hole in the street. An armoured bulldozer drove up and pushed another complete house into it so traffic could cross. I went to see the doctor to get my wounds tied up, and he took a dim view of the phosphorus burns from the smoke grenade. Bill Bradford wanted me to be sent down the line for treatment. He afterwards told me I was rather a worry to him because he did not know how far to trust my reports, though he agreed they were in fact quite accurate. But I begged to stay and was allowed to. Later that morning, a bunch of newspapermen came to see us. One of them introduced himself as R.W. Thompson, which struck me as odd. Indians sometimes introduce themselves and each other using initials. This is Mr. R.K.V. Dutt, but I'd never known a white man to do this. They were all very serious and in some awe of us, I thought. So there's a note about Reginald William Thompson. Mr. Thompson mentioned this little meeting in a book called, as far as I remember, Men Under Fire. He had a reputation, though I did not then know about it, for courage and sympathy with the frontline troops. Rather earlier, a jeep-load of young RAF pilots drove up to try and buy Luger pistols. I do not think we had any at that moment, but I offered to take them forward to see, but they declined. They had enough dangers to face in their own line of business. Since breakfast, various companies had passed through us, and so had one of the Gordon battalions. The other had carried out an attack on a farm in the country nearby called Thomashof. They had several officers killed and wounded. These men had not been to Poona nor read about street and house fighting in the Spanish Civil War, so when they captured the farm buildings, they did not take the precautions I told Ian MacDonald to take. The Germans had come up from the cellars and killed many of them. The 5th Battalion was to go and sort things out and to capture an outlying cottage from which we could shoot up the main road from Goch. The rest of the battalion was to capture Thomashof Farm, and then D Company was to go off and capture the outlying cottage. The operation was, of course, handicapped by the presence of various stout-hearted Gordons hanging on in some of the buildings with no idea where the Germans or their friends were. However, the battalion managed to occupy the farm. I arrived a little later, ahead of D Company, and found that a small German patrol was loose in the farmyard and building and was entertained by the sight of Battalion HQ standing to with deadly weapons poking out in all directions. Mowat Phillips, the pioneer officer, a little chap with a great sten on the prowl, was a particularly awesome sight. The Germans managed to break into a shed and killed a young chap in the intelligence section. He was a German Jew whose parents had brought him to Great Britain in about 1935. There were quite a few such, and they were good young soldiers. Eventually, a section of another company ran into them. The section commander bayoneted the German officer in command, who shot him in the jaw with a pistol. I do not know any more details, but that was the story I heard. D Company arrived about then, and we blundered off in what I hoped was the right direction. We came to Sandy Leslie and his company, and he pointed out the track along which we had to go. What we had to do was to go along this track for about 3/4 of a mile and then turn right across country. It was very cold, and I set off at a brisk pace at the head of the company. Of course, they were smaller than me and had more to carry. So when we arrived at where we were to turn off, I found all I had were my 2 runners and Bill Chisholm's platoon. Then a light machine gun started firing quite close, heaven knows what at. Having no ear for music, I asked if it sounded like a British or German machine gun, but no one knew. Bill brightly suggested that we contact them, though he did not say how. I decided the best thing to do was to ignore it and carry on our mission. So we turned right in extended line, and I put myself in front of the company, and off we went. We had no supporting fire, as it was hoped that we would surprise any Germans who might be in the cottage, so silence was necessary. I was still cold, and, why can't I learn, I walked briskly. Glancing over my shoulder, I saw I was rather far in front, so I stopped, and heaven forgive them, they stopped too. I could not shout, and gestures in the dark cannot be seen, so off I went again, and they followed. Presently the cottage came in sight with some figures standing beside it, sorry. A wind was blowing in my ears, but I heard a plaintive voice say, "Aber gib doch eine Antwort, give an answer." I expect they were worried about the patrol I described just now. I said, "Ich bin der Otto. It's me, Otto," with my best Bavarian accent, which no Bavarian recognizes, and let fly with my pistol. I ran on, and the platoon behind me dashed up. Some got entangled in rose bushes, but the rest joined me, and the Germans all surrendered, except one man in the house who threw a grenade from a window upstairs. A bit of it lodged in my throat, which tickled a bit, but it did not hurt much. It was not too deep. Then 2 or 3 Germans came out of the house with their hands up. I asked which of them had thrown the grenade, being rather impressed, really, but naturally they did not tell me, so I sent them off with an escort. Now, one thing which shows what a good company D was. This escort had quite a long way to go and could honourably have stayed at the command post or taken the prisoners even further back and spent the rest of the night resting comfortably out of the battle. But not a bit of it. Shortly after, he came trotting back and said he had dumped the prisoners with the RSM, Regimental Sergeant Major, and come back before he could be told to take them further. He wondered how the RSM would compete. But meanwhile, some firing broke out from in front, and so I led a section forward, shouting and shooting from the hip for a couple of 100 yards, after telling Bill to consolidate with the rest, but not to go into the house until daylight. I think that's Bill Chisholm, isn't it? Having chased or frightened away any Germans who might have been on our immediate front, we came back to the cottage and found that the rest of the company under Ken Buchanan had arrived, and Sergeant Delves's platoon had searched the cottage, cellar and all, a thing which I would never have dared to do. Then the Germans started to mortar the place, and a few of us were hit. The company sergeant major was quite badly hit, and I sent him back. My servant, Private Penny, said that he had been hit and could he go sick. I was hit in the leg and 1 or 2 other places. I rather forget exactly where, but nothing serious. However, being hit does sting a lot at the time and is rather a shock, and what with the bitter cold, I had been sweating and the sweat seemed to be freezing on me. I was getting a bit delirious and shouting at soldiers who were only doing their job. Kenneth Buchanan and Ian MacDonald and Bill Chisholm and Sergeant Delves, now acting as CSM, and the sergeant from Kent, were all well up to the mark, and I decided, rightly or wrongly, that I was no longer able to inspire and might only scare everyone, so I decided to go back. The stretcher bearers had established a small aid post in the potting shed where they had a candle, and one offered to go with me, but I told him to stay and walked away. As I was going across the field, a shell came over and I fell down and was hit a nasty one on one foot, where the toes join the foot. My hobnails, my army boots, saved me, but the bone was slightly cracked. I arrived at the command post, a pretty bloody sight, looking worse than I was. Everyone was far more sympathetic than I deserved, and I reported the situation of D Company in detail. The commanding officer then put me in his jeep and sent me to Regimental Aid Post. On the way, the jeep skidded into a ditch full of icy water, which probably did my foot good. I arrived at RAP and sometime later at the Queen Elizabeth Hospital in Birmingham. After I left, a self-propelled anti-tank gun arrived at D Company and broke down beside the cottage. However, its gun worked and it effectively stopped the Germans using the road 300 yards in front all next day. Later, a German half-track drove up and Ian MacDonald made a mess of it with a Piat, P-I-A-T. That's a projector infantry anti-tank. Kind of bazooka thing. Ian was mentioned in dispatches. That's something I haven't seen yet. And Sergeant Delves received promotion to CSM, and the DSM, so CSM is Company Sergeant Major, and DSM, Distinguished Conduct Medal, but sadly both were killed before they knew. Bill Johnston from A Company took over D Company. The officers were not nice to him at first and wrote to tell me he was too hard on them. Of course, he was rightly correcting the easygoing habits that had come in during my brief regime, and I wrote Kenneth a fairly stiff letter pointing out what a lot I owed to Bill Johnston from my days in Normandy. This may have helped, for by the time I rejoined at Delmenhorst, near Bremen, D Company was as happy and good, perhaps better than it ever was. I took over SP, Self-Propelled Company, again, and at Bremerwörde, the day before the Germans surrendered, which was 7th of May, 1945, I was accidentally shot through the arm by a Sten gun slung on a motorcyclist's back. I was sitting on the pillion, and when he kicked the starter, the thing went off. I had my hand on his shoulder, and the bullet went through my arm. It hurt like hell. So that's the end of Major Brodie's account. Got something about a video which you can find on YouTube, fighting in built-up areas, which is about Goch, the action at Goch, and Major Graham Pilcher, who commanded C Company of the 5th Battalion Black Watch, appears from the 14th minute. He relates the unopposed entry into Goch and the subsequent leapfrogging advance with 5 7th Gordons and 1st Gordons. Lieutenant Colonel R.W. Petrie, MC, D Company commander of the 1st Gordons, later criticizes the leapfrogging and says it did not work at Goch. Well, I suppose not. That there's mentioned in Brodie's account of lots of Gordons being killed anyway. Oh dear. Major Brodie's recommendation for a DSO. This I've got from the National Archives online. The National Archives reference WO 373 53 738. And this is the action for which Brodie was commended. On the 20th of February 1945, the battalion attacked south of Goch to capture 3 strongly held positions on the enemy line of communications. Major Brodie, commanding D Company, had as his objective a house and trenches strongly held by the enemy. When some 200 yards from the position, his company came under withering fire from several enemy machine guns in and around the house, and the advance was checked. Realizing that the situation called for desperate measures, Major Brodie immediately dashed forward with a few men, completely regardless of the intense enemy fire. On the way to the house, he shot dead with his revolver 2 enemy machine gunners in a pit and continued straight to the house, where he forced an entry with his revolver and grenades. During this time, he was twice wounded in the legs, but he paid no attention to the wounds. His company was so inspired by his action that they followed after him and cleaned up the enemy posts near the house and the remaining enemy in the house, collecting some 37 prisoners. There was still some enemy in an orchard and buildings nearby who were firing bazookas and machine guns at his position. Undeterred by this fire or by the considerable pain of his wounds, Major Brodie now assaulted this position with 5 men. During this assault, he was twice more wounded, but continued undaunted to storm the position and kill or capture the enemy in it. By now he was weak from loss of blood, but would not allow himself to be evacuated until he had reorganized his position satisfactorily. He completed this so well that at dawn, when his company was counterattacked by 2 self-propelled guns and infantry, it was able to beat them off. Major Brodie's courageous and heroic leadership, his dauntless determination and devotion to duty were largely responsible for the capture of a vital position, which completely dominated the main Goch road and denied its use to the enemy. Recommended for an immediate DSO by Bill Bradford, Lieutenant Colonel commanding 5th Black Watch, J.R. Sinclair, Brigade Commander. I've got their photographs here in the footnotes. T.G. Rennie, Major General, Commander of the 51st Highland Division. There he is in the footnote. Loretto School in Sandhurst. And then going up in seniority. Strongly recommended, B.G. Horrocks, Lieutenant General commanding 30th Corps. 30 Corps. That's he's quite a famous soldier. Approved by Harry Crerar, the General Officer Commander-in-Chief, 1st Canadian Army, and Bernard Law Montgomery, Field Marshal, Commander-in-Chief, 21st Army Group. All of which I have footnoted here. And here is a photograph of, well, you've got various people, but you've got Crerar, second from left, and Montgomery next to him, and Horrocks in the back. And then some Canadian generals here from the Imperial War Museums. Okay, Appendix III is outline of Alexander Clare Cunningham Brodie's collection in the museum at Perth, the Blackwatch Castle and Museum. So you've got those references here. Correspondence, personal accounts, manuscript citations, war diaries, rolls of honor, and notes. It's an abridged summary provided with the kind permission of J. Marshall, the archivist. And creator, well, Brodie was the main creator, then Bradford, Buchanan, Dow, Muir, and Rennie. And here's more detail about Brodie, another footnote about him, which I won't read. There's a catalogue entry for Brodie collection at the National Archives. And note that the Blackwatch Regimental Museum records held at Balhousie Castle, Hay Street, Perth, are catalogued at the National Archives under Other Archives, number 612 BW2-312. And that the January-December 1945 War Diary for the 5th Battalion of the Blackwatch is at the National Archives under reference WO 171/5159. Okay, Appendix 4 is King George's speech on VE Day, which is exactly the same, was not changed from previous iterations of this book. In fact, I think, let's see, yes, and Appendix 5 has not changed. It's the Loreto School Roll of Honor. And the Blackwatch Roll of Honor is the same as before, with various people mentioned in Brodie's account, people who died on the 25th of February 1945, on the same day as my uncle. I'm sure McKinney's was one. And I got that in 2017 from an online source. Appendix 7 hasn't changed. That's about my grandfather. No change there at all. Here's a footnote I've added, which is in fact a photograph of the Santo Domingo clubhouse. This is a golf course designed by my grandfather, which I visited in 2024. So that's the view from the course of the clubhouse. It's a famous championship course in Chile. What else? There's something else I've added. Yes. Well, this is when I visited the golf course, Santo Domingo, I was able to get a photograph of my grandfather's portrait and myself together, which was very pleasing. Here is how the Blackwatch as an organization changed name over time, title changes and formations. So I won't read all of that, but it's quite a complicated story. But that's recent. I've added that recently from Victoria Schofield's book. And here's the select bibliography. Victoria Schofield, The Highland Furies, The Official Regimental History of the Black Watch, in 2 volumes. And Major Brodie's account is briefly mentioned in Chapter 15 of Volume 2. Major John Sampson, The Officers of the Black Watch, that's just a kind of list of the officers with their brief careers in the Black Watch and outside it. Roderick Grant, I've already read the account by Major Brodie. John McGregor, well, I got this book from a bookshop in Australia online, Spirit of Angus, History of the 5th Battalion Black Watch. And then, most recently, I've got Dermot Rooney's Slog or Swan, British Army Effectiveness in Operation Veritable, February and March 1945. And chapter 6 focuses on Goch. Oh, and this is a, a badge of the Black Watch, explained with the Latin phrase explained. It's not only the Black Watch, it's the Kingdom of Scotland, and the Order of the Thistle use this Nemo me impune lacessit. No one provokes me with impunity. And the Black Watch is Scotland's oldest Highland regiment. And then this is an index which I have added recently. And that is, in fact, that. That's it. Yeah. So I hope you found that of interest. If I want to stop the share, I press that button there. Okay. So, yeah, it's been very interesting recently. I've managed to more or less double the size of the book. And here's Slog or Swan by Dermot Rooney, which arrived yesterday. Doesn't mention my uncle by name. It just says a platoon commander. There's the Spirit of Angus book, which I think was a library book. And this one I think was also a library book, Aberdeen Library, City Library, I think, the 51st Highland Division at War. I've also obtained British Army of the Rhine, BAOR, Battlefield Tour, Operation Veritable. This is a little bit, well, very detailed and a little bit technical, but it is of interest, of course, and relevant. And this is the list of officers of the Black Watch, compiled by, oh, wait a minute, let me just confirm, compiled by J.L.R. Sampson. And this is the second revised edition of 1989. Okay. My uncle is not in here because he was an emergency commission. This book only has regular commissions. So I think that's about it. So I'll put the links in the description and in the comments to relevant material, including the PDF, which you can download for yourself. Yeah, if you'd like to buy the book, it's available from both Amazon and from lulu.com. And Amazon is cheaper, but lulu.com, they're slightly better quality, I think, more expensive. You get what you pay for in this life, I think, most of the time. All right, so thank you very much, and I will see you anon. Let's stop the recording now.